From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. It's Friday, August 28th. We're back on the Macrocast. This is Tony Fratto coming to you from Western Pennsylvania this week. John Fagan. John, where are you?
I'm back in D.C.
Back in the D.C. area. Our other regular for Markets Policy Partners, Brendan Walsh, is driving somewhere, so he's not with us today. He's still, in the flotsam and jetsam of summer family moving vacation. But we do have two of our, HPS colleagues, Michael Steele, who was with us last week for convention review, and Bryan DeAngelis with us today as well. We're going to get, a Republican Democratic view on the second week of convention week. Maybe we can get sleep next week. This week it was no sleep on the East Coast because to stay up late and watch these conventions. But we're going to get into them because what was your thumbs up, thumbs down on the production value this week before we get into in the second segment in the substance. How did it look?
I think thumbs up. I think it looked, whether you love Trump or hate him, this was the Trump show, and he got exactly what he wanted. That was a dramatic backdrop at the White House last night. I think this was the show, the reality TV show he wanted to show the American people. Yeah,
you and I are going to debate at some point as to whether you will ever see that backdrop again for a partisan political event. But no question about it. It looked beautiful.
Right. It did. Yeah. It did. I would say thumbs up to both conventions. And considering this was all pulled together in the last few weeks, when usually this is months, if not over a year of planning, I think both production values were pretty high.
Yeah. Well, so let's go get more into it, into all of it in our second segment. We get to talk politics, but first, John, we had some big, some big economic news this week, at least a big economic announcement with, the Kansas City Fed's Jackson Hole Symposium. Usually it's the exclusive event out in Jackson Hole with, beautiful backdrops of the Grand Teton mountain chain back there and lots of fly fishing and casual dress by central bank types. This time it's all virtual. We got to see again Chairman Powell's den, I guess is his den, his office at home in Bethesda, Maryland. But the long-awaited, after the review and long-awaited, redirect on the Fed's, how the Fed thinks about inflation as a guide for monetary policy and the evolution. Some people expected a revolution. I think it's more of an evolution on how we think about the 2% inflation target. What was your take on it?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I totally agree that it was more evolutionary than revolutionary. There was a fair amount of anticipation coming into this. The Powell Fed has obviously been very dovish, and even though expectations for continued, ultra accommodation have run pretty high over the last, over the last year, basically since they abandoned their tightening cycle in early 2019. Even though expectations have been for dovishness, the Powell Fed has managed to out-dove even those dovey expectations. And this was more kind of on target rather than getting out ahead of market expectations on the accommodative side of things. Clearly they were going to shift. They'd signaled for months now that they were going to shift their approach to inflation. And indeed, Chair Powell announced an average inflation, basically an average inflation target, which implies much more, permissiveness toward an overshoot to the high side than the previous formulation had. Now it's not an incredible, an incredibly different framework, given the fact that Fed officials have said for, basically since we can remember, that the 2% target is not a ceiling. and that the target itself is symmetrical, which is, that itself implies that going above it, and we have seen the Fed go, we have seen core PCE, which is their chosen inflation metric, go above 2% and not be met with a furious tightening response. So average was, it's incrementally more dovish, incrementally more permissive toward inflation, but there was just a lot left out. One was its average over time. And what kind of time period? What do you, where
I thought like the hard questions are all, as they always are with these things, are, duration and magnitude and speed. How quickly do you act? How big will the act be? How long do you wait? Over what time period? They didn't really give any indication on that at all, on any of those things.
Yeah, the voluble St. Louis Fed President Bullard came out with his viewpoint on what an acceptable overshooting would be, about 2.5%. He indicated that he would be comfortable with core PCE, their inflation metric, running around that level for some period of time. But Powell warned that excessive. He didn't define what excessive price pressures would be, but that would be met with a tightening response by the Fed. So it was pretty balanced. It wasn't really, it isn't an enormous departure from where they were before, but incrementally a more permissive stance. They joined they joined it with a more nuanced view on their full employment mandate, right, with a focus on, particularly a focus on lower income segments. But again, they didn't tie that with any specific, numerical metrics, for instance. It was more qualitative. And at the end of the day, they didn't really tie any of these tweaked targets to policy decisions. So they didn't say, we won't raise rates until XYZ. Now, there's some expectation that they might explain, how they're going to hit these targets with this enhanced guidance formulation, which some expect to come as early as September. But the minutes from the last meeting in July sort of poured some cold water on that expectation of the September meeting, as they switched the verbiage around the timing to, at some point rather than, at upcoming meetings. So, and Dallas Fed President Kaplan was out saying that he didn't think that enhanced guidance was the right time for enhanced guidance was now. He thought it might be down the road. So he's clearly among the group on the FOMC that thinks that they've given enough guidance and they've tweaked their targets. So the market's reaction was pretty nuanced. We saw longer dated treasuries sell off. That's, in keeping, and TIPS break evens, the market-based gauge of inflation expectations, longer run inflation expectations, like TIPS breaks, 10-year TIPS break evens lifted up commensurate with, the more permissive stance on inflation. But the dollar rallied yesterday and gold sold off, which isn't really reflationary. We saw equity markets have a bit of a nuanced reaction as well. So the markets are saying this is not there are a lot of questions left to be answered. This is maybe. Look, I
think they're. Yeah, I mean, I actually would not have expected to see a whole lot of, market reaction, given the fact that, just one level deeper on reading is, tells you that this is not a dramatic change. If you try to think of functionally what it means, there is one, element of it, which is that, if you saw, full employment, we saw this before, if you saw full employment and growth return, and maybe some hint of an uptick in inflation, there was an expectation by some market participants that if we found ourselves with inflation above 2%, that the Fed would take action soon. And all they're really saying is, don't expect us to take action soon. If you see that, we're going to be doing some judgment about how long have we been below our target? How's the market reacting to us being above the target? And we're going to make some judgment, do some judgment calls on that. So don't think there's an automatic action. This isn't a machine. There's an automatic action. We are willing to tolerate above the target, and we really mean it. And that's, to me, like that's the only signal, which was not like it wasn't a universal view that the Fed would be uncomfortable above its target, but there was a certain subsegment of the market who did believe that they would take action to defend it. And we saw that with taper tantrum in the past, and other more when the Fed has tried to restrict, and market participants weren't ready for that. All that said, to your point on things like forward guidance, I mean, we're saying we're talking about something that we're talking about almost some fictional future. I mean, I thought about it yesterday. I thought, like, well, this is true. Like, I used to be able to dunk, like on a real 10-foot hoop. I used to be able to dunk on a 10-foot hoop. And it was kind of like me coming out and saying, like, I'm willing to tolerate myself being able to dunk on an 11-foot hoop for some time. It's like, well, I can't even dunk on a 10-foot hoop anymore. So
yeah,
right, I can only dunk on a 9-foot hoop now. And I'm saying, like, but if I can dunk on an 11-foot hoop, just know I'm going to do it for a while. We haven't been able to show that we could sustain inflation above 2% for any length of time for quite a long time now. So, like, willing to tolerate the thing that we haven't been able to do very well doesn't have all that much meaning to it. And also look at the world that we're in right now. Like it's not obvious that we're going to have inflation for a very long time. And in fact, Chairman Powell has recently said and emphasized, not only are we not thinking about inflation, we're not thinking about inflation.
Yeah, if you're talking enhanced guidance, that seems pretty enhanced to me. That's very strong guidance. And, what the Fed really left out was, here are our new targets. And what they left out was, and here's what we're going to do differently to achieve those targets. Right. And so without that may be coming, but clearly there's, that's really where the rubber meets the road. We've seen, the Bank of Japan always gets criticized for, upping its inflation targets and then doing the exact same thing they've always done, which never hit the previous inflation target. So there's a signaling element here. But we expect the Fed to really keep a comfy level of policy optionality here. We're in a very uncertain circumstance. There's no question.
And then the question just in this time, is this seeming the time? Maybe this is the perfect time to do it because it's not going to be tested in the near term, right? And so there's lots of time to absorb it and talk about it. Because look, the economy. Look, we got. Let me just do a little snapshot of where we are with the economy today. We have a sense that growth is leveling off. We saw jobless claims again, well above 1 million yesterday, weekly jobless claims. We're not, even though I am bullish on the likelihood of fiscal support coming in September, it's not here now. And I'm starting to see the signs of that. We got some decent personal consumption numbers.
That's from July. July data was always pretty strong, and so the August readings have been a lot more nuanced. And so I think you're absolutely right when you say that the inflation backdrop and the uncertainty that we have around is the post-pandemic era going to be more inflationary or disinflationary or deflationary. I think it's you can certainly make the argument that the Fed is taking a prudent approach toward emphasizing reflation and full employment at a time when the economy is hurting. But if you're a bond trader, you got to be looking at the Fed is trying to tell you that they're going to let inflation run hot. And what does that mean for longer duration treasuries? Well, it's not great for longer duration treasuries. That's, supportive and propulsive of higher yields at a time when, and you mentioned the fiscal situation, Tony, at a time when the Treasury is issuing a ton of bonds, and and their refinancing announcement extended the duration incrementally of those issuances. And so it's from the bond trader community, there's definitely some kind of head scratching as to whether this is, from a market's perspective, whether this is the right time for the Fed to do it. Economically, it's easier to make that case.
Yeah, it is. And look, I think, we had some talk yesterday think Mark Meadows, White House Chief of Staff, spoke to Speaker Pelosi. I don't think the call went very well, but the initial another outreach to essentially say, we would like to do something, and Speaker Pelosi saying, like, we would like to do something that we're willing to meet you in the middle. And the White House and Republicans are not yet ready to talk about the middle. And I would just say, like, to our point, like, the better arrive at something sooner than later, because I think the not getting $600 checks in the mail is for all the households who were getting it. You're going to start seeing that impact. Not getting the $1,200 check that everybody who made a projection on what growth was going to look like in the third quarter anticipated that there was going to be another round of $1,200 checks going to households. It's not there yet, and we don't know when or if ever it's going to come.
Yeah, you've said in the past that you think we've been on your side. We've thought that there would be a deal eventually, whether maybe it was after the Republican National Convention or sort of the lull around Labor Day, sneak something in there. And
I do think so. Look, I don't think it'll be Labor Day. I think it'll be well after Labor Day. I think it'll be closer to the end of the month. But I think they and I do think they're gonna get there. I think it's going to be a slow dance. To get there, and I do think they're going to get there because they do have still at the end of the month they need to do a budget, right. And so there are a lot of things that are coming together that are going to allow them to free up and do some things. I'm just saying that the political clock might not be well timed with the economic clock. So I think there's like a view by some that like, well, we can't come to agreement right now. Because we're still in the name calling and blame stage of this dance. And the economy's saying, guys, like, people are going to stop shopping. How does that look like when you get to November? And, and I think like they're talking past themselves right now. I do think, as I said, I think it will become apparent, by the second or third week of September that they might be late. I think they're going to be, they're probably going to be late if they wait that long, but that's sometimes
correct me if I'm wrong, but if it takes that long, those stimulus checks might not reach households before Election Day.
Yeah. Well, even if they do,
it takes a while.
Yeah. But even if they do, the damage might be done already. Well, let's get into that. We had, two epic weeks of, Republican and Democratic conventions like we've never seen before. And I suspect we'll never see them again. Like this, I think they're going to be more in person 4 years from now. At least I hope so. For other people who like to go to those things, but let's come back after the break and get into it with Bryan DeAngelis and Michael Steele and talk politics. You're listening to the Macrocast.
Markets Policy Partners provides sophisticated financial market analysis that is independent, accessible, and actionable for a broad audience. Learn more at marketspolicy.com or visit them on Twitter @marketspolicy.
Back on the Macrocast, last week we talked about the Democratic National Convention, virtual convention. This week we had the Republican, mostly virtual, partially in person, maskless. No socially distanced convention. Michael Steele, what was your take on the Republican convention this week?
Well, I think that what you're seeing from both parties is a very clear bet on the biggest issue in this election, which is the COVID-19 pandemic and the response to it. Democrats are betting on science. They're betting on, masks and social distancing and virtual events. And Republicans are very much trying to pretend the pandemic is a thing of the past. Every narrative used past tense talking about the pandemic. It was all about how we get back to the booming economy that we had before this pandemic without a real plan to end the pandemic itself. And at a time when 1,000 to 1,200 Americans are dying from COVID-19 on any given day, that's macabre and grotesque. But there's also some indications this week that it may be a winning bet. 7-day rolling average of new infections is down. The government's decision to purchase in massive quantities the Abbott rapid test for COVID is a great first step, which should have happened a long time ago, but is a smart thing to do. And we're seeing this fascinating study on detecting COVID infection in wastewater at the University of Arizona, all of which could be indicating we may be in a better position vis-a-vis the pandemic and reopening the economy by November 3rd than we expected.
Yeah, and I think could be is the key words there. I mean, I think about what Trump has done the last 8 months, and he doesn't have much credibility left on this. If he was running a campaign about falling cases and Abbott tests and a vaccine coming, and we could trust him, Republicans could trust him to be that disciplined, I'd be a little nervous as a Democrat. But instead you saw sort of an alternate reality last night. The optics alone stuck out to me as, Trump's having 2,000 people in the front lawn of the White House, no social distancing. I saw a couple masks, as most of us are at home and we can't go to a restaurant. Our kids can't go to school. We have to wear a mask everywhere we go. So I think there's a big disconnect between what Trump's living and what people are living, and we'll see how that plays out the next few months.
I think it's an important point. I mean, look, I think overall, like if you ask the Republicans, what you want out of this convention, what are the marks you have to, I think they hit every mark that they wanted to hit. I really do. I think their goal is to energize the base. I think the Democratic convention was it was a strategy of they feel like their base is sufficiently energized that they can then go, try to welcome the center and even Republicans to come on board. And so you saw that like very direct effort. This was very much a debate or a drive to turn out the base in the Republican Party, and even in particular states. There was a lot of niche issues. We're talking about lobsters and Wisconsin dairy farmers, right? It was like, pro-life, like they hit their marks on the narrow audiences that they're trying to reach. They got to do the thing that only a president gets to do, which used to be done much more with a lot more subtlety, which is to look presidential. They kind of like, there's no subtlety with this administration. So they got rid of the subtlety and just went, full blown blowtorch, light up the South Lawn with giant Trump Pence signs. But you got to do the grand entrance on the red carpet to the balcony with the crowd there. And to your point, Bryan, so I think they hit all their marks, but it was kind of it was a Potemkin village yesterday, right? I mean, like all these, people looking like pre-COVID, like a pre-COVID right environment, and no masks, no distancing, applause and cheering, and president in person talking to people, and it looked fantastic. But at the same time, everybody's had to get up this morning and put on their masks and not go to the office and not go to school and not go to the baseball game and wonder about what's going on with their business. So it's sort of like a back to reality this way. And I don't know how people are going to interpret what they saw last night, but it might not matter for most people if their base said, yeah, that was amazing and that's what we're in for.
Yeah, not to mention they had to walk off that South Lawn into a protest. And if you're watching this on any news channel last night, you're seeing a South Lawn of people celebrating the president cut right to civil unrest throughout the country. So there's
civil unrest hurting or helping, Bryan? I think they're obviously trying to use civil unrest as a scare tactic with suburban voters.
They are, and this is where I think they're confused. I mean, this felt like a spaghetti on the wall convention. They can't decide if Biden was the criminal justice reformer that caused a lot of
mass
incarceration, or is he soft on crime that's leading to civil unrest in states? And they want to run on this as if this is Joe Biden's America, but power of incumbency, you own the last 4 years. This is Trump's America we're living in.
But, and I think there's a huge irony in the president who promised to end quote unquote American carnage, presiding over so much of it. At the same time, there remains that sort of Teflon outsider feel to the president. It will work for him in a way that it wouldn't work for many other politicians because he's not a politician. I also think that it was very smart that they featured so many African American men prominently, and that was not obviously an accident. Part of that is trying to make college-educated suburbanites who are concerned about the president's racial rhetoric feel a little more comfortable. But I think it's also probably trying to dampen turnout among African American men, particularly in those crucial Midwestern states in North Carolina, Georgia. African American women are much more reliable voters than African American men. I'm not saying they're going to vote for Trump, but you could really kind of take the edge off some of that turnout. And I think that's probably what they were deliberately trying to do.
And I think the president's campaign over the next few weeks will be telling on that. This convention, I will say, did a great job of trying to soften the rough edges. You saw that in Ivanka's speech and Pence's speech, Melania's speech. But, you know, we've seen this attempt before, and then Trump goes back to being Trump. So can he stay disciplined? Can they still carry that message beyond, you know, the end of August at a convention throughout when people really turn in after Labor Day?
Yeah, they all sort of had this. They all sort of had this quality of, you know, I don't know how many speakers went up and said, "I wish you could see, you know, the person
Trump I know,
that I see back in these rooms that you don't get to see, because we know, wink, wink, we know the man that you see in public and on Twitter that's different from the person that we see." And so, well, you know, and of course the question everybody has is, well, why don't we see that person in public?
Right.
Why does it? It's not because we're not looking. We can't avoid them. You know, why don't we get to see that? And that's only one person's fault if it's real.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think that's also why you saw so many stories from, you know, quote unquote, real people across the country that, you know, trying to show the impact of policies, particularly pre-COVID, or even in response to the pandemic when they were talking to the woman who got a PPP loan. You know, they're trying to make the case for the positive impact of his policies. And I think part of the reason for that is they don't have a coherent second term agenda. So they're kind of, all they keep coming back to is more of the same. We're going to get back to where we were in January. And that's the Great American Comeback is the closest they can come to a coherent narrative for the second term, right? You know, everyone says that it's a job interview. The campaign is a job interview. You're supposed to tell the American people what they get if they vote for you in November. And the best they can come up with is we'll get back to the great economy we had earlier this year.
Yeah, and you all mentioned this last week, but I think it's never been more true. These were two conventions of personality. This was not about policy. This was, you know, Biden as the friendly, comfortable leader in a time of crisis. And this was, you know, Trump trying to show, again, those either softer edges, you don't know the guy we see behind the scenes, and a little bit of what he's done, but very little policy on both sides.
Yeah. One of the things that I mean, like, it's easy to be cynical about political conventions, and I'm very cynical about political conventions or, you know, State of the Union addresses. Like, you know, usually like my favorite part about State of the Union addresses is like you wade through all of these like standing, sitting, applause, don't applause, whatever, to get the stories of the people in the gallery, you know, because regardless of political party, they're always amazing stories, you know, amazing personal stories about some Americans that either have accomplished greatness or dealt with tragedy in very you know, strong ways, or you know, overcome things. And we get a little bit of that at political conventions too. And I thought, like, you know, some of the personal stories that you get, you know, last week the story of Trump with not Trump, but Biden helping the young man with
New Hampshire,
stuttering, right? And you know, the stories, you know, very powerful personal story last night of the parents of the young American woman who was, you know, taken hostage in Syria. You know, these stories are, you know, you don't get to hear them every day. It's worth you know, your time on the couch watching them, just to hear people talk in personal ways about the things that they've dealt with, and you get that perspective.
I agree. I think some of that storytelling is here to stay. I was also impressed. I'm curious what you all think. Some of the ability to do multiple locations, I thought, could be here to stay. You know, you always are going to have your central convention spot, I think, but going out to some of the candidates in their home districts, going out to different parts of the country that represent a message, whether you agree with it or not, that the campaign's trying to portray, I thought was powerful TV these past 2 weeks, and we could see that again in the future.
Yeah, why not, right? I mean, I do think that is one of the things that that is definitely a terrific development at, using technology. The technology mostly existed to do that stuff in the past. It's just, it was, it just never occurred to anybody to do it. You were more or less, celebrating the host city. And so it was really, frequently about the neighborhood around the city and region and that sort of thing. But why not use all the technology? And then Steele and I debated a little bit on this question of whether, we're going to see in the future presidents of either party, use the White House itself as a tool, as a communications tool in the way that the Trump White House has done, did yesterday, and presumably will do for the rest of the campaign. There's no reason why they shouldn't at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're a long way from everyone being outraged at Dan Rather saying, "This is Dan Rather reporting from the Nixon campaign at the White House," which was a huge deal in 1972 when he was snarky about the president using,
or even Al, the outrage at Al Gore using a campaign phone while he was in the residence. It was
right. I mean, I just think norms once violated tend not to reestablish themselves, and the advantages of using the White House as a campaign backdrop, to take the most egregious example, the advantages are so great that future presidents will be unable to resist availing themselves of them. And I think that if former Vice President Biden wins in November, he may show more restraint than certainly President Trump will if he's reelected, or presidents will in the future. But I just don't think you get back to respecting that tradition once it's been violated.
Yeah, unfortunately for that tradition, I completely agree with Steele. I think once you break that boundary, the next person may go back a little bit, but they don't go back to where they should go back, and it always keeps moving down the line.
I will take the other side of that. I still think that I think there was a lot of norm busting that Trump has done in this first term. The frequent walk by the camera sticks and doing impromptu media, I think will be a feature that future presidents do. They will see the advantage of it. Using social media in a personal way is that it will be a norm busted. You'll see a lot more of that in the future. I do think, though, on the kinds of things that were, whether work, how people work in the White House, the separation of personal business and official work, partisan politics and official work, I think we're going to get more Puritan on that and revert back. I think there's going to be, let's say if there is a Biden presidency, I fully expect to see proclamations that those things that happened in the Trump administration, we consider them, bad and inappropriate, and we are explicitly not going to do it, and lay down, rules on engagement in the on a whole range of things, including things like family working for the administration, things like tax records and lots of other things. I think they're going to be very very strong statements about conduct in and around the White House.
Well, and one of the things that I think, I've written this and rewritten it 6 times and need to get it published at some point, but I think one of the smartest things that Joe Biden could do right now is give a speech that admits some of the failures and self-dealing on the part of his surviving son, and pledge very specific reforms in the future that a Biden administration would follow in order to avoid such self-dealing or the appearance of self-dealing in the future. And I think it would be hard and it would be awful for him, and I understand why he doesn't want to do it, particularly when he seems to be ahead in the polls. But if I were that campaign, hanging a lantern on that problem, pivoting it into something positive, and kind of taking that weapon out of the president's arsenal is a really smart thing to do.
Guys, Thanks for joining us. I feel like we could we could do, and maybe we should do entire show on this. But what we could do is come back. I think are we 1 month away from the first debate? I think roughly.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's come back for debate week, and see how they did, and hopefully we'll have some good. We could talk a little bit more, less about presentation, a little more about the substance of the policy that comes up at that time, and we'll know a little bit more about what the economy is looking like and how voters feel about it. So thanks for coming on the Macrocast for convention.
Thanks for having us.
Convention week. Appreciate it. John, we'll come right back and take a look at what econ news we have next week. You're listening to the HBS Macrocast.
From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners. You're listening to the HPS Macrocast. Every Friday, we take a look at the major economic trends of the week. See more from Hamilton Place Strategies at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or on Twitter at HPS Insight. Hamilton Place Strategies is an analytical public affairs firm based in Washington, D.C. Learn more at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or follow us on Twitter at HPS Insight. On the first Friday of every month, HPS analyzes the latest jobs and labor market data in a digestible format. Sign up for our reports at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or on Twitter at HPS Insight. Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share. The South by Southwest Panel Picker is live this week, and there are some great panels on the list. Check out our favorites on Twitter at HPS Insight and be sure to vote.
And we're back on the Macrocast. John, that was fun. I didn't let you get a word in edgewise, but we'll talk politics more. What do we have? What economics we have next week? We have, drum roll.
It's August jobs, non-farm payrolls. It's Jobs Friday, and that it's going to be a consequential one, no question about it. We've had some upside surprises. There was some concern that the resurgence of COVID in July in various hotspots around the country might be seen in non-farm payrolls, like it's being seen in initial jobless claims. Although that has we got a little bit of a better reading this past week. The expectation is for non-farm payrolls in August to still look very strong. 1.5 million roughly new jobs added is the estimate, and place your bets. This is going to be a big number. We're going to see some other data for August coming in. Obviously, the next initial jobless claims for this week. And we're going to be looking at the purchasing managers indexes, a couple of different ones to give us some more data points on August levels of activity. So it'll be a consequential week, taking us into Labor Day weekend.
And we'll have our colleague Matt McDonald with us next week for some good jobs day. We'll dive right into it. But John, thanks, great show. We'll be back at it next week. We'll have Brendan with us too. Hope he's travels safely, and we'll have him back with us next week on the Macrocast. Have a terrific weekend.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share. Find more from Hamilton Place Strategies at hamiltonplacestrategies.com and follow Tony Fratto on Twitter at Tony Fratto. Learn more about John Fagan, Brendan Walsh, and the work they do at Markets Policy Partners by visiting marketspolicy.com.